Story number 1. The late bus. Cassandra hated taking the late bus. It was always empty, the fluorescent lights flickering, the hum of the engine the only sound in the eerie stillness. But tonight, she'd missed her earlier ride, leaving her no choice but to wait in the cold at the dimly lit station. When the bus finally arrived, it screeched to a stop, its brakes whining like a wounded animal. The doors hissed open, and she climbed aboard. The driver, an older man with hollow eyes and a face lined with shadows, didn't greet her. He merely stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. "Late night, huh?" she said, trying to break the tension. He didn't respond. The bus was empty, as expected. Cassandra chose a seat near the middle, close enough to the driver to feel somewhat safe, but far enough to avoid his unsettling silence. The bus rumbled to life, pulling away from the station and into the night. At first, everything seemed normal. The streetlights passed by in rhythmic intervals, their glow casting fleeting patterns on the windows. Cassandra pulled out her phone, scrolling mindlessly to pass the time. Then she noticed it. The bus wasn't stopping. It sped past the familiar landmarks of her route, her favorite diner, the small park with the broken swings, the corner store with the flickering neon sign. Excuse me," she called out. "I think you missed my stop." The driver didn't respond. Her unease grew as the bus turned onto a road she didn't recognize. The city lights faded, replaced by dark, empty fields stretching endlessly on either side. The air inside the bus felt colder, heavier, as if it were being drawn from some unseen source. "Hey," she shouted, standing up. "Where are we going?" The driver turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see the corner of his mouth curl into a faint, unnatural smile. Panic set in. Cassandra stumbled toward the front of the bus, gripping the seats for balance as the vehicle picked up speed. "Stop the bus! Let me off!" She reached for the emergency stop cord and yanked it hard. Nothing happened. The windows began to fog, but not from the cold. Dark handprints appeared on the glass, pressing from the outside. Shadows moved in the periphery of her vision, but when she turned to look, they were gone. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel, his knuckles bone white. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Let me off." The bus screeched to a sudden halt, throwing her to the floor. Dazed, she looked up to see the doors open, revealing complete darkness beyond them. No streetlights, no buildings, just a void that seemed to pulse with malevolence. "End of the line," the driver said, his voice deep and gravelly as if it were coming from somewhere far away. Cassandra scrambled to her feet, backing away from the doors. "I'm not getting off! Take me back!" The driver chuckled, low and hollow. "You were never going back." From the darkness, shapes began to emerge. Tall, angular figures with limbs too long and faces that were nothing but empty hollows. They moved with unnatural, jerky motions, their footsteps echoing like the ticking of a clock. Cassandra screamed, retreating to the back of the bus. The figures climbed aboard, their hollow faces turning toward her. The last thing she saw was the driver watching in the rearview mirror, his grin stretching impossibly wide as the figures closed in. The bus was found the next morning parked at the station. The seats were empty, the interior untouched, except for one thing: Cassandra's phone, lying on the floor, its screen cracked. Her last message was a text to a friend. "I'm on the bus. Something's wrong. I don't think I'm alone." Story number 2. The Forest Path. Every summer, Liam visited his grandparents' house in the countryside. Their home was quaint and surrounded by dense woods, the kind that seemed alive with whispers when the wind blew. "Don't go into the forest after dark," his grandmother always warned, her voice tinged with unease. "The path changes at night." Liam had heard the warning since he was a child, but he always thought it was just an old wives' tale meant to keep him from wandering too far. One evening, after a family dinner stretched longer than expected, Liam decided to take a short walk to clear his head. The sun had set, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting silvery light on the trees. Against his grandmother's advice, he ventured down the forest path. The air was cool, carrying the earthy scent of moss and pine. At first, the walk was peaceful. Crickets chirped, and the occasional rustle of leaves hinted at small animals darting through the underbrush. But as Liam walked deeper, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. The chirping stopped, the rustling ceased, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He checked his phone. No signal. Turning to head back, he realized the path looked different. The worn dirt trail he'd followed was now overgrown with roots and weeds. Panic bubbled up in his chest. He must have taken a wrong turn. He walked faster, but every twist and turn brought him deeper into the woods. The trees loomed taller, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out the moonlight. Shadows stretched across the ground, their shapes shifting unnaturally as he moved. A sound broke the silence, a faint melodic humming. Liam froze, his breath hitching. It came from up ahead, soft and sweet, like a lullaby. Against his better judgment, he followed it, hoping it might lead him to another person. The humming grew louder, leading him to a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. At the center stood a woman, her back to him, swaying gently as she hummed. Her hair was long and dark, cascading down her back like a veil. "Excuse me," Liam called, his voice trembling. "I think I'm lost. Can you help me?" The woman stopped humming. Slowly, she turned her head, but only her head. Her body remained perfectly still. Her face was wrong. Her eyes were too wide, her mouth stretched into an unnatural smile, and her skin was pale as bone. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, her voice soft, but carrying an edge that made Liam's blood run cold. I was just leaving," he stammered, taking a step back. Her smile widened, impossibly so, splitting her face like a crack in porcelain. "It's too late for that." The shadows in the clearing began to move, crawling toward him like living things. Liam turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. The forest seemed alive now, the trees closing in around him, their branches clawing at his clothes and skin. Behind him, the humming returned, louder and faster, mingling with the sound of his own panicked breaths. He didn't dare look back. After what felt like hours, Liam burst out of the woods, collapsing on the grassy field near his grandparents' house. The first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. He stumbled inside, gasping for air. His grandmother was waiting, her face pale and drawn. "You went into the forest, didn't you?" she whispered, her hands trembling. I got lost," Liam said, his voice shaking. "There was a woman." "Don't speak of her," his grandmother snapped, her eyes wide with fear. "She's the forest's keeper. If she let you go, it's because she wants you to come back." Liam didn't sleep that day. The humming echoed in his mind, and every time he closed his eyes he saw her smile. The next night, just before midnight, he heard it again, soft and sweet, coming from the edge of the woods. The forest was calling him back. Story number 3. The Forgotten Room. When Emily and her family moved into the sprawling Victorian house, they couldn't believe their luck. The price was almost too good to be true, especially for such a historic home. The real estate agent mentioned the house had been in the same family for generations, but after the last owner passed away, it had been sitting empty for years. "It's a fixer-upper," she said with a nervous smile. Emily didn't mind. She loved the creaky floors, the ornate woodwork, and the sense of history embedded in every corner. But what intrigued her most was the locked door on the 3rd floor. "Weird, right?" Emily asked her husband Matt as they explored the house. "It's probably just an old storage closet," he said, jiggling the brass doorknob to no avail. But Emily couldn't stop thinking about it. One evening, as Matt was busy unpacking boxes and their son Ben was asleep, Emily decided to investigate further. She searched the house for the key but found nothing. Frustrated, she returned to the door, staring at it as if sheer determination could will it open. That's when she noticed it. There were faint scratches around the door frame, as though someone had tried to claw their way in or out. Chilled, she stepped back, but her curiosity burned stronger than her fear. The next day, she called a locksmith. The man arrived with a cheery demeanor, but as soon as he saw the door, his face fell. "You sure you want this opened?" he asked, his voice uneasy. "It's just a door," Emily said, forcing a laugh. The locksmith worked quickly, and with a satisfying click, The lock gave way. He didn't stick around, muttering something about an urgent appointment before hastily leaving. Emily hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. The room was small and bare, its walls covered in faded wallpaper that might once have been cheerful. A single window let in a sliver of light, illuminating a child's rocking chair in the corner. But what caught Emily's attention was the writing on the walls. Scrawled in a child's shaky handwriting over and over were the words, "Let me out." Her breath hitched. The air in the room felt heavy, oppressive, and carried a faint, sickly sweet smell. Emily backed out of the room, slamming the door shut. She told herself it was just an overactive imagination, remnants of someone else's tragedy, long forgotten. But that night, as she lay in bed, she swore she heard the faint creak of the rocking chair. The next morning, Ben was unusually quiet at breakfast. "Everything okay, buddy?" Matt asked. Ben nodded, poking at his cereal. Then, after a moment, he said, "The boy in the rocking chair says he's lonely." Emily froze, the spoon clattering from her hand. "What boy?" Ben shrugged. "The one upstairs. He wants to play." Matt dismissed it as a child's imagination, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. That night, she woke to the sound of footsteps. Small, light steps, as if a child were running up and down the hall. She nudged Matt awake, but by the time he stirred, the noise had stopped. The next day, she tried to lock the door again, but the key was gone. Over the following weeks, Ben's behavior grew more erratic. He began speaking to someone who wasn't there, insisting his new friend didn't like being ignored. He woke up with scratches on his arms and legs, claiming the boy got mad when he didn't play. One night, Emily woke to the sound of Ben's laughter. She rushed to his room, but his bed was empty. Panicked, she searched the house, her heart pounding in her chest. She found him on the third floor, sitting in the rocking chair, staring at the wall. "Ben!" she cried, rushing to him. He turned to her, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. "He says you shouldn't have opened the door." Before Emily could respond, the door slammed shut behind her. The rocking chair began to creak, moving on its own. The last thing she heard before the lights went out was Ben's scream and the sound of a child's laughter, echoing in the dark. When Matt woke the next morning, Emily and Ben were gone. The police found no trace of them, but the room on the third floor was locked once again. No one could explain how.